And yes, welcome everybody. I think it's now about time to make a start. So welcome to those people that have joined us. Hopefully you're expecting us to be talking about, thinking about how to talk to your young people about the war in Ukraine. So I'm going to start with a bit of an introduction. So we're the Psychology in Schools team. So welcome to those people who haven't joined us on a previous podcast before, and welcome to those people. And welcome back to those people that have already. So my name's Kelsey Odgers and I'm a clinical psychologist in the team.
Hello, and I'm Linda Brindle. I'm a senior psychotherapist in the team as well.
Great. So I'm having some trouble moving my screen, so apologies if it's lagging. Hopefully that's working now.
Yeah.
So for those of you that haven't joined us before, we'll be using something called Slido as an interaction tool with you all. So we'll say a little bit more in a second about how you can join us on Slido. And just to say that Slido is completely anonymous, but other users will be able to see what you've written. So we just ask, when answering any questions, please don't put any personal or sensitive information in that. So your name or your child's name or anything that could identify you. And as we said at the start, the workshops are recorded and put on YouTube as well. So just be aware that anything put on Slido may be in that recording. Which leads us nicely onto Slido. So again, for those of you that haven't used it before, if you just pop slido.com into any mobile device, so your mobile phone, a PC, and just use the code 800030, or for those of you who are more tech savvy than I am, there's a QR code there as well, which you can scan to join us at Slido. So it would be great to get as many of you on Slido as possible. It's a really nice way for us to interact with you and for you to interact with each other. And as I said, it's completely anonymous. So as many of you as possible on that would be fantastic. Okay, so we'll start with an initial Slido. So hopefully it's all working okay. For those people that may have only just joined us, if you can join us at slido.com and put in the code 800030, that would be great. And the first Slido is just exploring what age is your child. So this is a multiple choice answer. Oh, fantastic. So it's working. Had one person respond already. So it'll be great to get as many of you as possible on Slido. Fantastic. And if you've got more than one child, select more than one option. That's great. So a real range of ages, so one from each category, which is great because we'll be thinking about sort of children's ages and developmental levels a bit more as we go on today. So that's great. So thank you to those of you that have joined us at Slido. For those of you that may be just joining, because I know that we've only just started, you can join us at slido.com using that code on the screen there. So it would be great to find out whether you've attended one of our workshops before. So we've been running them for quite some time now on lots of different topics. It's always nice to get a sense of, whether you've been before or not yet. Again, so a bit of a split. So welcome back to those of you that have been to one of our workshops before, and welcome again to those of you that haven't. And it'd be great to get a sense of where you're dialing in from. We've had people from lots of different areas. So it's great. So someone in the Suffolk area. So Suffolk. Great. I'll just leave it open for a little bit longer to see if there's anyone else who can join us at Slido. Again, it'd be great to get as many of you as possible. So thank you to those that have joined us on Slido and started responding. It's great. Okay. We'll just move on really in the interest of time. Okay, so we've already started with a little bit of an introduction to the topic. So as I said, we'll be thinking about how we talk to our young people about what's going on with the war in Ukraine at the moment. And of course, this is an emotive topic. So we're going to start just by thinking about why have we, developed a workshop around this area? Why might this be important? And then we're going to be thinking about, what can we do as parents and carers to support and talk to our children at this time? Okay, so thinking about why this session. So really, this session is an opportunity to identify what we know can help our young people sort of get through this current situation and healthily manage some of their big emotions that they might be feeling. And I think it's fair to say really that the war in Ukraine has brought out many feelings. And actually some of us on this call, and of course this is something that we don't know, but just to be mindful of that some of you may be more closely caught up with the situation than others. And I guess we don't know how personally connected you might be, and indeed how your children might be. So we're going to be thinking about what this means for different people. But we do know really that what's going on in the Ukraine at the moment can impact on all of us. So we do know we can do things for our young people to help reduce the negative impact that this might be having on them. And I guess it's important for us always to bear in mind that all of our young people are different. So they're coming with different past experiences, different developmental stages, which again we'll be thinking about today, and different levels of maturity. So age is a factor, the developmental level is also a factor, and of course, their different experiences and where they're coming from. So we'll just be thinking about that in the context of how you can support your young person and talk to your young person about what's going on at the moment. And I guess there are a few points today that we hope will be helpful, which will of course be considering within this broader context of uncertainty. So really, we didn't want to do this session without naming that what we've all been living through in the last 2 years, particularly with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which has meant that all of us have been living in this real state of uncertainty. So it's important really to consider, the topic around how do we talk to our children within this broader context. So we'll be thinking a little bit more about that too. So just really an overview. So I know I've touched on this already, but sort of the first half of the session, we'll be thinking about the importance of emotions and emotional containment, and really thinking about that in a broader context, and then bringing that back to the current topic and why it's good to talk. We'll be thinking about how we talk and why, and the importance of that. So again, thinking about every child being different and making the right place, the right time and the right pace. Then for the second half, Linda's going to be talking about how we manage the exposure and the time spent on news stories, how to turn some of those big feelings into helpful actions. And then finally, and really importantly, looking after our own well-being as parents and carers. So we just want to start by asking another Slido question. Think about how have your children been since hearing about the Ukraine war? And this is a free text answer, so anything that comes to mind, whether it be how they may be feeling, changes in behaviour, for example, anything you've noticed. And again, for those of you that have just joined us, if you could join us at slido.com, so pop that into a mobile device and use the code 800030. It's our main interaction tool. It is anonymous, and it'd be great to have as many of you as possible joining us today. So asking questions and worried about World War III, absolutely. So you're noticing a young person asking a lot of questions about what's happening and particularly how that might be, what that might mean for them and the world, and absolutely very anxious, afraid of a wider war and what that will mean for us. Yeah, so really that overlap there already. These are really, really normal responses for our children to be bringing. I'll just wait a little bit longer, see if there's any other responses. And it can be anything that comes to mind. So worried about what is going on, worried about if there might be a World War III, will they bomb the air bases near us? Again, those real big worries that young people are bringing, worrying about bombs and fires happening in their home. Absolutely, and it's really normal for our young people to think about the impact that will have on them and the people closest to them in their communities. So we can really see, you know, just in those 4 responses, there's overlap with all of them. And I would say for those people not on Slido, you know, your children may be bringing different things. They may also be feeling anxious, of course, about these things, but other young people may be, you know, showing changes in their behaviour, so maybe struggling to sleep or being perhaps irritable, or some may be unaware and not appearing too interested about what's going on. So we'll be thinking a little bit about those differences as well, but absolutely thinking about these big worries that young people might be bringing to us. So thank you so much to those that shared them on Slido. That's really useful. Okay, so really linking to this, we're going to be thinking about emotions. So I could see from the previous Slido, you know, the 4 parents and carers that contributed there was a real sense of young people experiencing this big emotion, anxiety. And I guess what we know is, as humans, we experience a wide range of emotions. So, you know, anxiety being one of them, but also other feelings, including anger, excitement, happiness, and sadness. And that's just to name a few. And that is completely normal and also really helpful and important for us. And actually, the reason why they're so important and part of our sort of normal human experience is because they tell us something important, and they help us to make sense of our everyday experiences and ourselves in the world. And as we all experience these big feelings throughout our lives, we learn over time how to manage these feelings as best we can. And as we grow, we learn new ways of being able to manage our emotions. But it can be really hard, as I'm sure we're all aware, particularly managing those big emotions that we've already touched on, you know, anxiety, fear, worry, anger, because they can actually leave us feeling really overwhelmed and out of control and feeling really like we don't know how to manage. But this is particularly difficult for our young people, because the part of our brain, so this bit that sits behind our forehead, called the prefrontal cortex, so the newest part of our brain, that's the part of the brain that's almost like our control tower. So that helps us really to regulate and manage our emotions. Now, for our young people, that part of the brain is still developing till they're 25 years old. So actually, they need a lot more support, as I'm sure we're all aware, in regulating these big emotions. So as parents and carers, it can be really difficult for us when our young people experience these really overwhelming emotions, and sometimes can leave us feeling overwhelmed as well. And this is why emotional containment is so important. So we're going to start by sort of thinking about what emotional containment is. And you'll see sort of throughout the workshop us referring to this really throughout. So when our young people experience these big emotions that I've just touched on, and supporting both ourselves and our young people, this emotional containment really is key. And actually, this is the experience of feeling held and protected and contained. But although there's lots of images there, which are mainly physical, it's just to say that emotional containment doesn't have to be physical. So it's just about being with our young people, and making space for them. So we can do this as parents, as I've said, by providing that space and support, giving clear and consistent boundaries, which helps our young people feel safe, allows them to express those big emotions in a way that is safe and supportive. So however big their emotions are, actually we can do this by being physically together, listening, understanding, and sharing in that same experience through coming alongside them to help them deal with them so they're not totally overwhelmed by them. And we've got a nice example in the next slide to sort of illustrate some of this. But really, this is our job as parents, is to enable our children to feel safe, even when feeling these big emotions. And we can enable them to start to learn how to manage their emotions by helping them to name them. So we could do this by, for example, wondering, what they might be feeling. And it's not about getting this right all of the time, because of course we don't always. But even if if our young person is upset, you could say, I can see that you're crying, and I wonder if you're feeling upset. And that will enable them to start to learn over time how to learn to manage their own emotions. And really, as I've said, this is the important thing, is about sitting with. So this I see you. So when our children are in distress, firstly, we need to come alongside them and acknowledge their distress without trying to move too quickly into sort of problem solving or getting rid of that feeling. Because I think there is really a pull to do that for all of us, when we're in any situation, when someone we love and care about is feeling these big emotions, we just want to help them to sort of move along past it. But actually, what we know is that if a child feels seen and understood, this will immediately lead to a de-escalation of that physical response that they have when they feel these big emotions. And then they'll be in a better place then of thinking or talking and making sense of what now or what happens next. So often, as I've said, we want to try and take that away, but actually learning, for our children to learn that they can feel these big emotions and actually experience them and be okay through them and be able to tolerate them. That's how they learn that resilience and build that resilience, and getting that sense that even when things are hard, they have the skills to be able to manage that. And as parents, we don't have to pretend that we know all the answers and that we know everything or can control everything. But really, that key is just to show up and to be with our children and get alongside them. And I've got a really nice example from Bren Brown in a podcast. So they were talking about when their teenage daughter was so distressed in her bedroom, sobbing in the dark. She just went into the dark bedroom and sat with her and said nothing, was just there in the dark. The whole time she was looking at the light switch on the wall thinking, this is so hard, I just want to turn on that light. But she didn't. She understood that sitting with her daughter in the dark was her main task as a parent. And this teaching was invaluable in enabling her daughter to experience that emotion, to come through it and not be afraid of that emotion. And this enabled her then to be prepared in similar situations in the future. So I think really going back to that quote on the slide there, it's not my job to turn on the light. It's my job to sit in the dark with my child, to teach my child it's okay to sit in the dark. So again, if we bring that back to those big emotions, that emotional containment, really what that's saying is it's my job as a parent to sort of be with my child when they're experiencing these big things, and to teach my child that these big emotions are okay, and that I'm just going to see you and be with you through these big emotions. Okay. So really, I know we've talked a lot now about emotions, and obviously the workshop today is around it being good to talk. And the reason why we wanted to start by thinking about the importance of emotions and that emotional containment, because that is, if a child feels contained, they need to feel contained and regulated in order to be able to talk. So it's really important, first and foremost, in thinking about that emotional containment, how we can support our young people through these big emotions so that they enable them really to be in a position to then perhaps be able to talk to us. And again, we're going to talk about how that varies depending on your young person and their sort of developmental age. and development. So I guess when we think about what's going on in the Ukraine, we know first and foremost it's important to talk. So if we avoid the topic, which I think when things are difficult, when it's a really big emotive topic like the Ukraine war, there is a pull sometimes to want to avoid it because it's difficult, and that's natural for us as humans. But actually, by avoiding talking about it, we'll not be helping our children to share their understanding of what's happening, and actually to make sense of some of these big feelings that they may be having. So looking for opportunities to speak to your children, again, in the right moments is really important. So giving that safe and supportive space will help them both process those difficult emotions, as we've talked about, that really I see you, being with you, but it will also enable them and ensure that any misinformation or misunderstandings can be addressed with you. So actually what we know is with lots of young people about lots of different things, that our children will hear stories from others. So that might be, depending on their age, stories in the playground from their peers, or from social media, or indeed the news. So actually the things that they might be hearing in the playground or reading online can actually be really unhelpful, as we know. So it's important to be mindful of and address these in this safe and supportive space with you, so that you can really ensure any of that misinformation and those misunderstandings can be addressed. And actually this will help to comfort them and reduce those big feelings of anxiety and maybe feelings of overwhelm that they might be experiencing as well. So it's enabling them to sort of find out what the facts are, help them to separate their feelings from facts. And in doing that, that be honest, I think that's so important. So it's really important not to lie to our children, because of course they can pick up on things like that. But to be honest, if we don't have all the answers, because often we don't, and especially with this kind of a situation, we're not going to have all the answers. So, it's about being honest and open with our children about that. If it's possible to try and find the answers, make that clear, but also it's okay to be in a position of not knowing and to be honest. And finally, it's also important to listen. So listening is equally as important as talking, as we know, probably even more so. So listen to what your child has to say, don't make those assumptions. And actually, this will allow you then to have a space to acknowledge and normalize any feelings of distress that they might be bringing. So when we're thinking about the importance of talking, we need to think about how we talk, because the way that we talk, the way we start a conversation is so important. And this is all about right pace, right place, and right pace. So no matter what their age, our children, more than anything, really, really appreciate and need our undivided attention at times, and that feeling properly listened to. So particularly when our children feel distressed or confused, someone listening to them, validating their experiences, really helps them to feel comforted and safe. So when thinking about talking to our children, we first need to think about then how we start this conversation. So it's important when we think about the war in Ukraine to introduce the topic using short and simple sentences. So thinking about age appropriate information. So your young people, thinking about what's age appropriate to them, what's developmentally appropriate to them. And again, we'll be saying more about this in a second. But you can use things such as good and bad people, for example. You can really simplify that language depending on your child. But really it's important to let your child lead that conversation. So inviting your child, to have a conversation about this, so introducing that topic, maybe asking an initial question, but it's really important not to push. So again, that Bruce Perry quote, encourage, but do not push. So it's important that young people feel able to take the lead in this discussion, and that they don't feel pushed into talking about anything that they're not yet ready to talk about. And like we've said already, validating a child's experiences. So in telling them that it's okay to feel whatever they might be feeling. So really, really validating what they're bringing, and take time to understand and encourage them to talk about their own feelings. So actually, you know, they're learning really through doing that, that it's okay to have these feelings and they're not as big and scary as they might seem. And of course, related to all of this, that timing is so, so important. So we know that open and honest conversations are most likely to happen when we're feeling calm, when our young people are feeling calm, and there isn't a lot of pressure. So try to direct your young people to having these conversations at points in the day where you're not sort of trying to manage multiple or competing demands. So, you know, maybe getting out in the morning for the school run might be a really busy time, I'm sure, for all of you, as well as sort of, you know, around dinner time and things like that as well. So actually, you know, if a child is approaching you with a conversation during those times, you know, try and explain to them that it's really difficult for us to talk right now, you know, because we're about to get ready to go to school, or, you know, we're just dishing up dinner. But let's talk about this, to say tonight, when, you know, after dinner, when there's more time for me to listen properly. And it's really then important that whatever time you say, so picking a time that works for you and your family with those minimal distractions and other demands, it's really important when we say that to our young people that we then go back to that at the time that we said, so they know that we are listening, that we're spending that time to acknowledge and validate their feelings. So really, how do we do this when we're thinking about the different ages of our young people? And it was great to see on the first Slido that you did, that there's a range of ages of your young people. So we're going to be really thinking about points to remember when talking to our young children, points to remember when we're thinking about talking to middle age children, and then finally our older adolescents as well. So when thinking about, you know, talking to our young children, it's really important to take into consideration their brain development. So we know that young children will be much more concrete and literal in their thinking. So they're very, very black and white in their thinking, and they're also going to be ecocentric. So this means that they'll, you know, connect everything directly to them, and they won't take other people's perspectives. And that is completely normal for a young child. Their brain, their brain doesn't have the capacity to be able to do that skill yet. So young children may struggle, therefore, to verbalize the worries that they'll be experiencing. So you may notice some changes in their behavior. So that might be things like being more tearful or clingy, refusing to go out, their sleep might be affected, they may be more irritable, but also they might be expressing themselves more so through their play. So it's important really, you know, to be mindful of that as parents, and just to watch out for any subtle changes or any changes in your young person's play. So we know that children under 7 are likely to benefit from that simple, limited information that they can relate to. So try to keep it as simple, and remember, they will take the lead from you. So managing your own feelings, which we'll be talking a bit more about later, will help them to feel more contained. So we know that if you as a parent are feeling more contained and regulated yourself, that will be helpful for them as well. So you can use really simple language when thinking about the Ukraine war with young children, you know, so using good and bad people, for example, or using a map to highlight to them how far Ukraine is from us, so they have a sense of their own safety. And really, we can't emphasize enough the importance of routines and quality time for young children. So keeping your routines normal will help to emphasize their safety and security. And actually within those routines and their everyday life, giving them opportunities to be, you know, certain about what they can control in their lives. So for example, are there any choices that they can have over certain aspects of their life where appropriate? You know, that can be anything really simple, you know, from I don't know, choosing which type of fruit they want to have, but just enabling them to have some sense of certainty and also choice in their life where they can. And just be mindful, you know, for those younger children, that quality time is so important. And actually, you know, they may need more quality time than usual. So it may just be enough that extra quality time spent together with your young person may be enough just to contain some of those extra anxieties that they might be having, even if you're not talking about it with them. And this again will provide that sense of safety and that emotional containment that we've talked a lot about already. Okay, so points to remember when speaking to our children in middle childhood. So again, thinking back to that brain development, we know that during middle childhood, the brain is going through lots and lots of development. And socially during middle childhood, children very much shift from an inward focus of the world to an outward focus. So from about the age of 7 years old, children become much more aware of their own feelings, and they realize that their feelings are distinct from other people's feelings. And that means that they begin then to consider the feelings of other people around them. So a much more outward view of the world and other people. So you may start to notice, or start to see your young people in this age range develop, depending on their developmental level and temperament as well, to start asking you more about the war. And thinking and hearing more about it. So I guess what we know is for young people in middle childhood, they're much more able to think about the future and different aspects of the world and people in it, especially those people close to them, which I know is something that kept coming up on the Slido when we thought about, what are your children bringing right now? So they'll be especially focused on, as I've said, what this means for them and what this means for people close to them. And actually, we know that around this age, those big worries are common too. And this may mean that they're feeling those big emotions in relation to the war and the consequences of it. And as I said, those big worries may be focused very much more so on themselves and the people closest to them, so their families and their friends. So again, listening carefully to those worries and explaining that it's normal to feel these feelings then helps your child to feel understood and comforted. And again, it's really important, as I've said, young children, this middle childhood phase, may be starting to hear different things. They may have access, for example, to the news and social media that those younger children may not be having. So it's so important to correct those misunderstandings that they may have got, and just clarifying what they know and where they're getting their information from, and just providing that reassurance and answering questions that they may have as honestly as we can, but again just holding in mind that we may not have all the answers and being honest about that. And don't be afraid really to acknowledge the range of emotions. So think together about how you might cope and how they might cope with some of these big feelings that they might be having. And just provide reassurance that adults are working really hard to stop the war and to look after people that have been affected by that. So that's a really important thing to say as well. Just telling them, it's that this it is a really difficult situation, and these big feelings we're having about it are really, really normal, but that lots of people are working very hard to try and stop the war and those that have been affected. So points to remember when talking to our older children. So we've sort of, as you've seen, gone through the different developmental ages to think about brain development and therefore what our different age children may be needing at this time. So when we think about our children as they get older, they tend to start having an even broader worldview. So we might find ourselves with our older young people having more of these in-depth conversations about sort of broader issues, issues around humanity, injustice, and really what this war means for the world. So, as I've said, in middle childhood, they may be much more focused on themselves and those people closest to them, and that's really, really normal. But as children grow, they have this much broader sense of the world, this broader worldview, and what this means more broadly. So you may find that they have some quite strong feelings and opinions about what's happening. And actually, these might be quite different to yours as a parent. And that's okay. It's important just to be respectful, to acknowledge that difference and say, you know, that is okay to have differing opinions. And it's really healthy and helpful to have these supportive conversations, as it enables our children really to have their own minds, to have their own feelings, and learn about their values and what's important to them relative to other people. And as our children, you know, grow and get older, of course, they're going to be much more independent from us, and they'll have things going on in their lives which is separate to us, to lives outside of the family home. So really, it's important to pick those right moments to have those conversations, because it will be about fitting in with other things that they've got going on in their world. And finally, it can be really helpful to therefore be much more collaborative in our discussions with our older adolescents. So thinking together, if we don't know the answers, you know, how could we research this together? Or how could we both go away and just, you know, find this out and then come back together and have a conversation about this? So really what we're saying is it's just about understanding where your young person is at developmentally, and taking into account, you know, their temperaments, their individual differences. You know, you'll know your young people better than anyone else, but hopefully this has just been useful just to give you a sense of the different things to consider when we're talking to our children in those different ways and what is helpful. So I'll just now hand over to Linda for the second half of the workshop.
Thanks, Kelsey. So Kelsey spent a really good amount of time helping us all to think really about the importance of emotions, emotional containment, and what our role as adults, be it parents, carers, or interested others, can do to helpfully support our young people making sense of and managing to understand and process the current situation with the war. And I guess the second part is really just to give us some time thinking about what other things can you do that will helpfully support your young person through this challenging time at the moment. And as Kelsey said, we know those challenges can look very different for each person, depending on their connections with Ukraine and their past experiences as well. So let's move quickly on to Slido, and let's just get a bit of your feedback. This is really helpful for us to hear about what's going on for you a little bit more. So we were just wondering, are you finding that you're paying more attention to the news yourself in the recent weeks since the invasion of Ukraine? And Slido is really helpful for us to understand and make sense of where you're at with all of this. Okay, so from those that have answered this, that suggests that a lot of you, the majority of you, are paying much more attention to the news. And I guess we found that's been very similar patterns when also thinking back to our experience of the pandemic, especially in the early days of that. And secondly, let's just go on to the next Slido. I wonder how it makes you feel when you watch or read the news at the moment about the current situation. So just pop down on Slido. It could be a multiple different answers that you want to put down, the different feelings that you might notice that you have when presented with the information in front of you. Okay, so some different responses already. So sad, worried, and anxious. Somebody's saying skeptical of the media. I'm not quite clear what that means. So you could put something else down to help me understand. Yeah, helpless, wanting to do something. Yeah, anxious. Okay, impacting on actually your own sleep. Yeah, frustrated. a lot of anger at the injustice. Yeah, another helpless, guilty. Yeah, yes, it can feed into us a guilt about what we have when we see what others don't. Yeah, so actually reading the news, watching the news, hearing the news can really impact on the different emotions that we can feel around it. And I'm just seeing this last point that's come up. Thanks very much. You know, sort of, yeah, so there's a couple of things there. The media is known to not tell truth. So actually knowing what is reality and what is false about all the information that's coming out there. And the second point is about actually being aware of how helpful it is to our mental health if we consume too much. And I guess that's such a helpful point when we look at the Slido. We look at all your responses on the screens here, and those strong, powerful, difficult emotions that you've expressed, that you feel. And I guess that really does help us to be mindful of how we're choosing to take in and consider the news. And so this next slide is really all about that. So we know that we could be consumed with the news all the time. I mean, there's so many different medium that we can now choose to access to get information, as well as 24-hour BBC News, for example, certainly with all of the information on social media. And there's an awful lot out there. And I guess this slide is really all about us thinking about how we manage all of this information. Because it's really tricky, isn't it? As our children get older, or if they've got a smartphone, they can really easily access lots more information. So much is done on the computer, including homework. So again, it's another way of accessing information very easily there. And obviously, this is a topic that will get talked about in school as well. But whereas we know that in school, there will be some thought around what is appropriate for young people to see and access and read. We also know that there's access to all sorts without sort of managing actually what is definitely true information or what is appropriate given a child's age around the current situation with the war. And so I guess it's easy to get really bombarded and overwhelmed very quickly, as that person on Slido mentioned. And it's very easy to get sucked into finding out more. So I wonder how many of you actually, whether it be with COVID or the current war situation, were finding that you were searching and getting caught up with looking for more and more information, almost seeking out bad news. And sometimes if people talk about it as doom scrolling, where you're sort of seeking for more information about what's going on. And we can get caught up in something that then can become really unhelpful for us. Now, it's really natural and very helpful for us to be aware, and also for our children to be aware, that as humans, we're programmed to be seeking and looking out for things which might cause threat for us. It's part of our survival strategy and a way of keeping us safe. But of course, when there's no immediate danger to us, a continual focus on negative, difficult things actually can really impact on our mood and really be unhelpful to managing our mental health and well-being overall. And so I guess this slide's all around thinking for yourself, for those in your family, you know, actually what is going to be helpful for you to do in terms of managing the amount of information coming through for you and your children. So perhaps consider the amount of time, if you haven't already, that you or your child is spending on social media, or when you're choosing to have the news on. And notice, even if it's in the background, you may not even really be listening to the news that's on in the background on a radio station or whatever, but perhaps your child is. So I guess it's about being mindful and thoughtful about everybody in your unit, and thinking what might be impacting on them. And what we know, and a number of you have said how worried and anxious your children are. Some children will be naturally much more worried and anxious about this situation. So of course that sensitivity that you've also already likely to be showing, because you recognise that, is really key. And of course for some of our children who aren't talkers, who don't necessarily express so clearly their worries, we don't know always quite so much what's going on for them. So I guess it's always better to err on the side of caution and think about limiting what's available and out there, so they're not just left to sort of think about and worry about lots of information without them being too ready to talk about it either. So I guess obviously we know finding opportunities to talk about what they have been exposed to, what they have heard, as Kelsey talked about, is really key, and looking for times perhaps early in the evening, not too late and close to bedtime, is really helpful. And thinking of bedtime, and I think one of you said how, you know, those things are impacting on your sleep. Also being aware of actually turning excuse me, turning things off at night time, like phones, not having access to internet at night time, in order to try and protect sleep time. And as I said, if you talk earlier in the evening, to have a chance to express worries, so later on the brain is a little bit more relaxed and able to settle, that can be really helpful. So I guess what you're trying to do is not just have that focus on difficult, upsetting and challenging information filling you and your family's brains, but ensuring that you still have lots of opportunities to do something else, to have activities that you and your family enjoy, that you can relax and make you feel good and take you away from that constant sort of threat sense that can happen when you've got a lot of negative information being inputted into our brains. And so obviously one way of doing that is also sort of really noticing that balance, where when you're noticing difficult news stories, trying to also balance and notice and perhaps talk about with your families hopeful and positive news stories. And yeah, and I guess, you know, whilst there's less of that, so obviously in the media that's definitely out there, and that can be a really good way to create balance in the mind and actually get a bit more of a sense of what's going on without always just focusing on the worst. Okay, let's just move on to the next slide. And many of you will have heard this talked about previously with COVID situation. And again, it's important here. You mentioned about feelings of helplessness. And I think it's so common for all of us to feel helpless and powerless. And it's very hard to manage those emotions without trying to do something about it. And we know that emotions are trying to tell us something important. They're sort of they're telling us about how we feel about what's going on. If we're afraid, our emotions will encourage us to seek safety or comfort. If we feel angry or feel we might want a way to sort of address injustice. And if we can channel our emotions into something more positive and helpful, that can feel very helpful for us to manage something that's difficult, as well as be helpful to the people that we're trying to help. So I guess thinking about what would work for your children. I know that some schools have been looking at opportunities of ways in which they can help out, and different communities are also doing the same. What things can they do, perhaps just to raise some money? Because it's not just, is it? All those things can have a really powerful impact. If you think of all the schools in the country being involved in raising money to try and help support those in most need. So your child might be able to get involved in some fundraising or supportive activities. They might find there's things that they can do, or have their own ideas of what they feel that could be helpful, that means that they have a sense of being helpful rather than helpless. But there's also something else that we can all think about, and that's about what we can all do, and that's the power of kindness and the power of hope, and even in the most terrible situations. And actually your child and you might actually feel, I don't feel able to be directly involved with doing things linked to this current situation in Ukraine, but I do know that I can still help by being encouraging and supportive and really influence others through the power of kindness. So this slide is really just talking about that. So we know that studies have shown that when we experience kindness, a hormone called dopamine is released into our brain, which gives a sense of elevation and lifts our mood. And acts of kindness not only reduce the stress and anxiety or low mood of the person receiving that kindness, it all has an impact for both us, if we're the giver, and in fact others that observe the kindness. So in fact the hormones that get released through acts of kindness can impact a whole range of people and help people feel calmer, more relaxed, happier. Research has shown more energized, that they might feel more confident, that relationships might get strengthened. And this whole sense of kindness then actually taps into our shared humanity. So when we're experiencing really hard situations that are difficult to process and digest, and we see our children really struggling to manage those things, and sometimes it can feel really hard to see how can we directly help situations which are happening a long way away, then I think it's really helpful to think about the acts of kindness that can be a real focus of actually our way that we can learn to have some power and some positive influence in those around us. And however far that sort of spreads will depend upon the actions that we take. We've got a link to a video at the end if you're interested in this a bit more, the acts of kindness, or you'd like to show that to your child. So we've got a few other slides that we'd just like to highlight. Kelsey talked at the beginning about the situation and the links with also the previous pandemic and how that's led to uncertainty for many people at many times. And so that sort of sense of uncertainty, as I talked about, and feeling out of control can really throw us. And clearly in the pandemic, there were major changes to our life and schooling and routines and what we could and couldn't do. And that will have had a real big impact for some of our young people on uncertainty. And actually this crisis in Ukraine, while so very, very different, may trigger for some of our young people or re-trigger for other of our young people some of the worries and uncertainty that they had before. And that sense of loss of control, if felt not that long ago in the pandemic, can be more easily re-triggered when other things feel very worrying or anxiety provoking. And so big events like what's going on at the moment is a natural trigger for some young people and some adults as well. So what can you do about that? I guess the first key thing is to just really be curious and notice what emotions are coming up in your household. Remember what Kelsey said? It doesn't always look like anxiety in a traditional sense, and that our young people are withdrawn. Maybe they're more irritable, or on a younger child, maybe they're more clingy. So just notice what sort of emotions are coming up. You might see that through their behaviours. And notice if any of the routines or sort of normal habits that you do have changed actually since this crisis has begun recently. Is there anything different? Because as Kelsey said, everything we can do to sort of try and encourage consistency and routine will help our children in the household feel safe. So that's always a really important thing to hold on to. It might be worth you thinking back to actually how your children did cope with the pandemic, with all the change there, and trying to think back to what strategies, what approaches worked for you to support them, and also that what things did they do themselves that seemed to really help. You know, because once you've identified strategies that help with worries or uncertainty, they can be reused and reused in lots of different situations. And as Kelsey said, give them opportunities to feel it in control. So choices, or other responsibilities that are manageable responsibilities. So there's still opportunities for them to feel good about themselves, and that they have some sense of control when a lot around them feels like it's changing. I just want to highlight, we have a particular workshop on uncertainty as well, which the next one will be running on Tuesday the 24th of May, and we've got a link at the end of this session. So if you feel that that's something that your child really struggles with, then actually that's a great workshop that can actually tell you some of the benefits of learning how to cope with uncertainty, and even embrace it. So for some of you, you might find that helpful. Okay, let's just think a little bit about what we should do, therefore, if our child is showing stress. So I think some of these we've already talked about, so I'll talk through very briefly. Sort of making yourself more available is absolutely a key thing. Encouraging relaxation times, and because we know that when sometimes people are stressed, they actually get quite focused on doing things and actually not having the space and time they need. I wanted to point out the power of physical activity, because what we know is that it's a great way of releasing stress, and actually it's a great way to settle any of us when we feel over aroused, when there was perhaps very strong, powerful emotions going on inside of us. Then doing physical activity can really help to manage that arousal levels, to make them more manageable. And in the same way, actually, when we're under aroused, so perhaps if we're feeling lower, then physical activity again can be a really powerful way of lifting us up, so our arousal levels are more at the point that they should be, at a sort of midpoint. So knowing things like that is really helpful, because I know that it can be hard, depending on our children, to find physical activities. But look for any opportunities you can, whether it's taking the dog for a walk, doing a kitchen disco, doing jumping jacks, kicking a football around in the garden, doing some trampolining, any opportunities you can to help support your child to learn how to manage when they have strong or powerful emotions. Then physical activity is one way to help. I think there's other points on here which we've already talked about, but I guess often when you're finding that your child is showing stress, then what's really important is to think about, how can I be a little bit more flexible in how I'm managing them at the moment and supporting them? Do they need more cuddles? Do they need a nightlight on? Do we need a bit more one-to-one interrupted time each day, so that I can really just focus in and listen in on them and come alongside them? So those are some of the things to think about. At the end of this session tonight, we've got a resources slide that will tell you a little bit more about the other workshops that are out there. But obviously, if you feel that your child is particularly struggling in their home and school and social environments, then you may want to link in to let your school know, or get other support through your GP. Okay, so I wonder how you, as parents and carers, have been feeling since hearing about the Ukraine war. So you've told me a bit about how your children been doing. How have you been feeling? I know one of you mentioned, I think some of these feelings have come up in the previous slides when we were thinking about what you're reading, and you're talking about that sort of, that guilt again, feeling guilt or sad or upset or anxious. So perhaps let's move straight onto this other slide. I'm not sure if that's not working. Yeah, helpless, thank you, it is. It's all coming through now. Yeah, am I doing enough to help? Yeah, really hard. Real concern, yeah, about the people of Ukraine and the implications, those wider implications. No, thank you. So no, those feelings are very powerful, aren't they? And we're thinking about our children, but equally we're having all those powerful emotions ourselves. And I wonder for you how much you're struggling to sort of manage those emotions when you're also thinking about your child so much that, you know, that they're important to you. So you've chosen to come along to this workshop tonight. So what do you do to take care of your own well-being? We're just coming towards the end, but I think these are just a couple of important slides to think about just now. I think I'm learning the slide is taking a little while to come through. Okay. So yeah. Okay, so we were talking about physical exercise. It sounds like somebody's finding that's helpful for them. Talking, yeah, having time for friends and family, and speaking to others, speaking to colleagues. Okay, another one, finding exercise really helpful. Okay. Okay, so there's a real sort of theme. Time, so connection, I think that's what I'm seeing. A lot of people finding connection with others important, looking after themselves in terms of early bedtimes, yeah, exercise and yoga. Let's just move on to the next slide. So yeah, I think, you know, it sounds like those things are really important. What we know is before you can as effectively support your young person as you could, it's always good to make sure that your resource bucket is filled up first. So finding space and time for you. So I think those of you that have contributed to the Slido, it sounds like you're trying to do that. And we notice that theme of connection to talk about things with those important to you. Basic self-care, again, it sounds like you're doing that. And then remember for yourselves, limiting the information that you access if it feels like it's having a negative effect on your well-being. And why we're highlighting this is it's important for you. And it's important for you because when you have a sort of state of well-being that's manageable and contained, when you can contain your emotions, then you're far better able to contain your child's. And really, without doing that, that becomes very hard to contain your child's emotions. And so looking after yourself is really important. Let's go to the next slide, Kelsey. And if you want to support your child to process their emotions, make time to look after your own. Now, remember that we don't always get it right as parents, and sometimes we'll make mistakes, and sometimes we'll think, oh no, but I wasn't like that. I wasn't containing my emotions when I was dealing with my child the other day or last week. Don't get stuck in that sort of critical mode that it's very easy for us as parents and carers to get caught up with, where we're noticing our failings, because that only leads to unhelpful negative emotions that actually don't help us to move forward. So instead, if you're spotting that you're remembering times that were difficult, and we all make mistakes as parents, none of us get it right all the time, then remember we all have an opportunity to repair. And perhaps we haven't managed our emotions always well in the past when we've been struggling, and then it's very hard for us to manage our children. But we can, if we instead take an approach of self-compassion and forgive ourselves and recognize we've got it wrong. And remember, we can be honest and say to our children, yeah, I'm sorry I got it wrong that last time or the time before, or I'm going to try and do things a different way so I can be more helpful and supportive to you. Then that will be the most helpful way of turning a mistake into something positive, and a great way of modeling that for our kids. And then in the same way, if we are learning to manage our own emotions, and those emotions when they're really strong, that's a really powerful way for our children to observe that they can see what we are doing, and that will help them to learn to do the same thing. So that's why we've almost started at the beginning and at the end of this session by talking about emotional containment. So holding those big emotions in a way that feels safe. If we can do that for our own emotions, then we can support our children to help them and sit with them alongside them. And as that quote said, I see you, be there with them to help our children manage those strong emotions themselves. Okay, so I'm sorry I'm just slightly over. I'll quickly just briefly go through these last slides when we've got some resources for you. So these are just the reminder take-home messages. I think we've reiterated them. Emotions are really important. If we can contain them, then we can help to learn to cope with all sorts of things. We looked at a few specific examples: limiting media use, turning big feelings into positive action, and kindness as key other areas that you should be thinking about. And here on the right is a drawing by Charlie McKeesey. Everyone is a bit scared, said the horse, but we are less scared together. Okay. And thinking about the role of parents and carers, Bessel van der Kolk said, the parent-child connection is the most powerful mental health intervention known to mankind. So as we can see with the horse and the boy, it's doing things and being alongside together is what can be really powerful in supporting our young people. Okay, so just before we look at the resources slide, it would be really helpful if you are able to just give us a bit of quick feedback on this session tonight and what's been helpful. And that would be really helpful to guide us in what's going to be useful in future, because we do really want to learn from the feedback that we hear from people. So if as many as you are able to log in and just fill in these really quickly, that would be great. Okay, and on this slide, this is really helpful. Two things you'll take away from the session. So I guess what we know is by actually identifying two things straight away, we're much more likely to hold on to them and actually have a go at using them in our day-to-day life. So just have a think for a moment. What two things will you take away from the session? Okay, and it's different things for different people. So emotional containment and the importance of looking after our own well-being. Yeah. Listening and validating our children's feelings and being patient. Yeah, yeah. Being upfront and talking and making it clear that it's okay to feel this way. Yeah, yeah. Managing our own emotions and more listening. Yeah, communicating on our level. So really considering what does on their level, what does our child need? Which of our children need which approach? And of course, if we've got several, then we might need to consider very different approaches for each one of our children. Okay, and let's lastly just look at resources. And we just want to highlight some resources. We will be sending you out these slides so you can access these links. So the podcast on the subject that we talked about tonight, we mentioned the free other parent carer workshops that are coming up. So there's a managing anxiety session just after Easter holidays, actually, Tuesday, the 26th of April, and that's normally monthly. There's also a managing uncertainty one in May and some others that come up regularly. And there's different sheets talking about to children about the war. That one is a nice general reminder of some of the things that are key to think about. And then more specific resources around trauma where that seems relevant, and that might be more relevant for people coming into the country or people with those links than for the general population. And lastly, I talked about the video talking about the science of kindness. So that's a link for you there. I hope you found that there are some things that will be useful for you to take away tonight, and thanks very much for your feedback. That sounds very encouraging. We'll be repeating this session after Easter, so if you want to let anyone else know who you think might benefit from attending, then do feel free to share the details on Eventbrite. But thanks very much from both of us, and have a good evening.